I'm speaking to Swapan, the CEO of Deeply, and we're joined today by Rob Shaw, Head of Standards and Integrity at PFC International. Thank you for joining us, Rob. First of all, Swapan, are there any EUDR updates this week?
Or every day there are UDR updates. We see, letters being sent by associations. We see a letter this Monday sent by the large organizations. So one part is requesting stop the clock. Other part is saying we invested tons of money and processes already. We want just to continue, and we're requesting a relief for 12 months on auditing, but we're not recommending any postponement. Just let's keep the momentum just moving on. So these are the voices which are coming, and yeah, let's see what the final call will be. I can just repeat only one thing. It's a bit unfortunate that the business is kept with a lot of uncertainty till the last moment. So waiting till the mid of December for a final call, I think that's not the best approach for any business. So I am keeping my recommendation to all, just keep moving with the compliance. It is a value for your company. And whatever happens, it will happen. Then you would simply need to adapt to any changes. What would be the call in the future?
Yeah, so we'll keep our eye on that space and updated on that topic. But back to today's topic. So we're talking about how forestry certification and digital platforms are redefining transparency and trust across the natural product supply chain. So today we're going to be covering how the introduction of the EUDR has changed expectations around what chain of custody needs to deliver, how companies can use certification data as a foundation for digital compliance rather than starting from scratch, and also our other main topic is the biggest gaps between chain of custody certification and EUDR requirements and how digital systems close them. So just for a bit of context, traditional forestry certifications, such as PFC's chain of custody, have adapted to meet the digital demands of the EUDR, updating benchmark standards to align with the regulation and offering support with compliance. And then digital solutions like Timber ID offer a full solution to create a transparent, traceable, and efficient compliance process from the first mile to the final product that's going out onto the market. So the impact of regulations does affect the whole supply chain, and it goes beyond just ticking that box to say you've got that regulation. It actually becomes really important to the culture and branding of the company, and that really helps them to demonstrate their values and an overall commitment to the environment. So if we go back to the initial questions, Rob, the first one there was, how has the introduction of the EUDR changed expectations around what chain of custody needs to deliver?
Thanks, Holly, for that question. Before I joined PEFC as head of standards and integrity, I worked for a certification body for 8 years, and I was, amongst other things, a chain of custody auditor. And third-party auditing for chain of custody revolves around sampling. And up until recently, sampling has been very analog, with auditors looking at hard copy documentation or looking into ERP systems of companies and taking samples of transactions to try and link one supplier to the other. But EUDR, with the requirement for polygons at the forest level, and then bringing in the use of technology, is really now forcing the whole sector to think about how you can make end-to-end traceability, and not just proving origin of forest where the trees originally came from, but also now the pressure is to look at the quantities of trees leaving the forest and how that relates to the actual finished product, which in many forestry products is a very, very complex situation.
Yeah. And how can companies use certification data as a foundation for digital compliance rather than just starting from scratch?
The EU in their guidance document do recognise voluntary certification has a value for risk management. And so PEFC certification will offer assurance up and down a supply chain that due diligence has actually been done, and our standards, which have been around for more than a decade, require all companies to carry out due diligence and maintain the records for those. So we have the skeleton of how the system should work. And in fact, in developing our chain of custody EUDR module over the last 2 years, which is now available to PEFC certified organizations, that modular standard aligns with the requirements of EUDR. So those companies who are PEFC chain of custody certified, which is a significant number of companies around the world, already have an advantage in terms of due diligence and all working to a common standard. So we're building on that. We're not complacent, and over the next couple of years, we'll be further revising and reviewing our standards and coming up with new digital products into the future.
Brilliant, thank you for that. And then finally, in terms of the main questions that we're looking at today, what are the biggest gaps between chain of custody certification and EUDR requirements, and how can digital systems close them?
Well, as I say, with the optional modular standard, the EUDR standard for chain of custody, companies can pretty much align their management systems and their procedures with the EUDR regulations. As Swapan mentioned, unfortunately, the uncertainty right now in the EU and the calls for simplification mean that the next 2 or 3 months are going to be very confusing. However, what's clear is those companies situated outside the European Union who are in an EU-bound supply chain will very much need to comply with pretty much all the main EUDR requirements. And so, I would recommend to them that they look seriously at getting the modular certification added on for the alignment. But what EUDR has brought in and emphasized, this doesn't mean it's not present in our standards, but they're really emphasizing this, is legality of the harvesting production in the forests in the country of origin and indigenous people issues, which overlays the actual forest conversion or degradation issues. So where digital systems come in, such as Timber ID, is from an Earth observation point of view, using satellite technology, you can capture quite a lot of information about the forests and the harvesting areas where the trees are coming from, and then track whether or not any conversion is taking place, or more complex situation is any degradation is taking place. Which would mean, for example, certain tree species being removed over time and then not replaced, which is lowering the biodiversity value of the forest. Again, a very complex topic, and yet to be tested in law when the EUDR finally begins. From a PEFC point of view, we decided quite early on that we didn't want to own or control any particular digital system ourselves, so we are recommending and promoting to the market on our EUDR webpage tech providers, and in fact Swapan was one of the very first people to come forwards and engage with us, and we've been helping Swapan co-create his digital product as we go along. So what the digital systems can do in terms of supply chain frictionless trade is move the polygon information and the due diligence information up and down and across supply chains between actors in a very efficient way. And this, this is the future. We've seen this in other sectors. We've seen this in financial accounting. There's been a big digital big bang, and in other sectors such as textiles, this is happening. So forestry and the whole forestry, paper and packaging sector needs to move this way as well.
If I can just add on this one, very important to topic what Rob mentioned are the source of the supply, which are mainly outside of EU when we're looking at it. So just wanted to add on that if we're today an importer and we're dealing with our partners, which are based in whatever country outside of EU, we need to be aware that even will be granted additional, to time for implementation. It is quite complex process. We began, as Rob also mentioned, May 2024. Yeah, our first clients, who are importers as well, or are producers outside of EU, began the journey with us more than a year ago, and it's complex to gather all the information, to handle it in the appropriate way and be able to deliver the requirement, which is the verifiable and reliable information, proving the source of the commodity, of the material. It is complex. So I don't want to give a wrong message here to the audience, but I can tell you, those who are still waiting will never fulfill their obligations within next 4 or more, weeks. It's really taking, time. So whatever the changes will be there, whatever postponement will be there, especially when you are based as a supplier outside of EU and you are the importer in EU, you need to take care of the supply chains and get the processes of compliance in place. Otherwise, basically, you will be not able to match any date. Yeah, that's the recommendation, and I wanted to add what Rob was saying on the importer part. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's definitely been a common theme throughout our coffee and compliance series, hasn't it? That you really need to not wait and see what happens. You need to get on board. Okay, so we've got some further questions here. One for you, Swapan. The traditional chain of custody systems rely heavily on documentation and audits. How can digital traceability tools like Timber ID improve that process?
Yes, also to come what already Rob mentioned in the comments. Yeah, so the classic way of auditing compliance is sampling. Yeah, so by sampling, which when you are providing an audit, you're always focusing on a part of the business. Yeah, and based on that, you're, let's say, analyzing and doing your assumptions and decisions. Now, what we're trying to put on the market is the automation of the processes, which are not based on sampling just, but are based on understanding and documenting every transaction. Yeah, and this is the big difference. And when you link it with the chain of custody and this certification, part, with the processes which we build in, which are enabling the clients to get the transparency and all the data in, basically you are ready for any certification audit at any time. Because all the documents you have in the system, you took care of gathering them in the right way, in the organized way, in a timely way, and you're here also sure that once we're looking at the importers, so the first operators bringing the product to the EU market, which is the big portion of liability here, are confident that their suppliers are providing them with the right information. Yeah. So also getting back to what Rob said is as well more about legality, about degradation than just deforestation. Yeah, and this we need to have in mind, that we're now moving to the times where data are having more and more importance and value. And that's equal for compliance, data. These are not only financial data. The compliance data are equally important, that we can present ourselves and say to our supply chain, look, we're compliant, we're ready, we're certified. We are having the chain of custody, additional certification. We have the digital tools here implemented, which are guaranteeing that the processes are in place.
Brilliant. And another one for you then, Swapan. So Timber ID enables digital chain of custody through electronic delivery notes, geolocation, and decentralized data control. How do these features complement or enhance existing chain of custody models like PFCs?
It's allowing us to perform our obligations in an organized and controlled, way. Yeah. So if we look at the ideal case that a supply chain is using electronic delivery notes, they are using Timber ID platform. So in this ideal world, all of them are linking their instances on a partnership mode, and what is very, very important in the decentralized approach, keeping the privacy and security of their data. Yeah. So very, very important. And this topic is always number one on the table when we're having the discussions with the clients. So now, again, getting back to the ideal world, which we're aiming to implement in a supply chain, is irrespective of the number of stakeholders who are in the supply chain, once they're linked, it's very easy for someone who is at the end of the supply chain and wants to upstream have an audit check on a transaction, can do it easily, gathering all the required information. Now, additionally, which is even more important, because the electronic digital delivery notes are being there's being added a layer of a QR code, which is linking the data. I don't want to get in details here, but basically, if we are in a retail and we want to understand the source of the timber, we can just scan the QR code and request to receive this information, and it will go back to the supplier who is at the source, and he will share this information for that exact transaction, because the data are in the system. So look what the ideal work could look like, what we're aiming. And as we discussed as well, we're not talking about EUDR only. We're talking about compliance. And we know certification, it's more than just EUDR, it's compliance. It's since years that the companies understood that they want to differ their operations from others. Yeah. So what they were doing, we want to get certified. We want to demonstrate that we're caring. Yeah. So now with the EUDR, we're getting to a next level, as we discussed, with the chain of custody. The next level will be the digital product passport. Then there will be other levels. Actually, it is not really important which regulation we're going to match. It's important that we understand that we want to be compliant, and we want to deliver the compliance to all stakeholders in the supply chain.
Yeah, that makes sense. And again, that has definitely been one of our key themes throughout. I've got a few questions for you here, Rob. So firstly, what would an EUDR ready chain of custody look like in practice?
Well, that would depend upon the product and the origin of the tree. So if you take something like furniture, for example, Vietnam is one of the biggest furniture producers in the world and does a huge amount of export to Europe and also to North America. But not all of the wood that is used in furniture production in Vietnam comes from Vietnam. It comes from other surrounding countries. So, and this is the same, for example, for engineered wood flooring or for high-end broadleaf products in Europe, whereby you have a lot of beech and oak and other species coming from the Balkans and from Eastern Europe into the EU to make, for example, laminated flooring. So in these two examples, you would expect to see documentation such as export paperwork and import paperwork and bills of lading for ships and train transport documentation. And in the past, this has all been looked at by the chain of custody auditors and written down, and it's been described in a narrative in chain of custody audit reports. So we're now moving to a phase whereby a lot of this information will flow all the way up the chain. And we also need to recognize here that when EUDR actually happens, it will be the monitoring organizations in each country that will be auditing this information. And they're very familiar with EUTR, which existed before, and they're also very familiar with certification. So if you have a certified supply chain where third-party auditors are checking on this regularly, and then you build on top of that digital transferability of this information, then you're really starting to give assurance to everybody in the supply chain, particularly the importers, because they will be subject to the audits, that if they get asked a question by the German authorities or the Belgian authorities, they can present the evidence, and quite a lot of the evidence will be verified. So this is how it's going to work in practice. And the good news is, in a way, is the other risk commodities, the coffee and the cocoa and the soy, etc., they don't have any UTR predecessors. So the monitoring authorities are going to be getting up to speed with all the other risk commodities, and hopefully they will be looking at risk management techniques in timber and timber products, and that's where certification already has a value. So yeah, when the rubber hits the road, and rubber, of course, is another risk commodity which we actually deal with, I think those people who are in a certified supply chain and who are digitally ready will have a big advantage, and that's remains to be seen over the next couple of years.
Yeah. Brilliant. And then the next one here is, with EUDR's focus on geolocation and digital traceability, how is PFC integrating or collaborating with technology partners? I know that you've touched on this already, of course.
Oh yeah, well, just a few extra points on this. So we're at the moment about to launch a new database. So in January next year, we'll have a new bespoke SQL-based international database, and we're expanding the functionality of that database. And we're already having things like API connections to Timber ID, so that and other tech partners, so that anyone who is looking for certification validity within a tech platform can get automatic downloads of certificates and product scopes. And over the next 2 or 3 years, we'll be building all the species of each product and product group into that, so that we will be a source of information which then flows digitally into tech platforms, and people can utilize that to check on the validity of certification. It's a little way off yet, but I'm also talking to some interoperability, that's quite a hard word to say, tech solutions, because not everybody is in a linear supply chain. Quite a few manufacturers and traders have multiple customers who have different tech solutions. So the next big thing to tackle is interoperability. And between PEFC and the certification bodies that we work with, we have a bigger vision here to allow third-party verified data to be shared with anyone who wants it, with suitable privacy and security built in. We're not talking here about pricing, we're talking about products, species, and quantities. And again, this will help the end-to-end traceability and the end-to-end accountancy of volumes and units, etc. But that's the next 5-year project. So,
Well, that's really interesting, and definitely there's a big demand for that. And then another one for you, Rob. How can certified organizations, certification bodies, and auditors benefit from solutions provided by technology partners to make EUDR compliance simpler and more consistent?
Well, I think the one good thing about Swapan's product with Timber ID is he's already built in an internal audit function within the platform. So this is great because companies will be able to do their own internal audit, which is a requirement under the PEFC standards, because we're based on ISO standards, and internal audit and management review are required. And this is where I mentioned earlier, the role of the auditor will change over time, because the auditors will then be able to come in and interrogate whole supply chains and look at volume transactions, look at the movement of goods, look at the origin of the goods in the forest. And there will be no great need to write volumes and volumes of text into an audit report, because potentially these tech platforms will then be available to monitoring authority personnel and customs people, etc., so that there's more transparency. And so the auditor's role will be much more using their brain to focus on risk rather than plowing through hundreds of paper documents and writing down reference numbers. So yeah, we're really going to see a shift in the value of auditing and the way that auditing is performed. And so all these banks of digital information will really help the auditors to write less. We're going to look at digital audit reports across the PEFC Alliance for certification bodies, and we will see audit technique changing over the next 3 to 5 years in a very big way.
Yeah, brilliant. That's a really interesting time. And then finally, one for both of you. So, Swapan, let's start with you. So, what piece of advice would you give to companies who still haven't started preparing this process?
I mean, the advice is simple, yeah. Just get started now if you didn't do it, yeah. Usually in an organization you should have plan B, plan C, and in the real life, what I'm observing, many companies don't have a plan B or plan C, and they're just waiting. So, my personal experience in many years, I deleted the word waiting from the business use, because it doesn't bring you anywhere. So the recommendation, just do it. Rely on the technologies which are there. They're already at a very robust level, and as we had this discussion here today, we shall be adding new layers. So just to give one additional my comment, as Rob said, we can check easily if the PFC certification is valid. And don't get me wrong, we already had cases that somebody has edited the validity date in a PDF the document. Yeah. So the importer was assuming that the documents are correct, but they were incorrect. Yeah. So this is a next layer, as here Rob was mentioning, also for the auditors. Yeah, the technology will move on, that we shall be delivering the highest possible level of authentication of the documentations which are there in the systems. We should not forget that the documentation are usually in the local languages or dual languages, if we're happy. Yeah? So just have this in mind, that waiting not good. Compliance needs a lot of effort and engagement, and wish you all the best in that path to move on.
Brilliant, thank you. And then Rob, just conscious of time, but what advice would you give as well, please?
You can see I've got a minute left. I would make sure, if I'm an importer or if I'm a product trader in the EU, map your supply chain. You need to map your supply chain back to forest level. Look for the high-risk countries, look for the high-risk commodities. And if you think you're in a supply chain, if you're at the other end, try and figure out where your products go. We've had Australian companies saying to us, oh, EUDR doesn't matter to us because we're thousands of miles away. And then they suddenly discover that they're selling a commodity or a product, and it then goes to China, and it's then in an EU-bound supply chain. So wherever you are in the supply chain, try and find out who your customers are. Map your supply chain back to the forest, and then start your risk management. And by understanding your supply chain, you will then be able to pivot and either move to a lower risk supply chain or get your suppliers engaged in the process that we've talked about. And yeah, don't delay. So.
Fantastic. Great advice from both of you. Thank you. So that brings us to the end of this episode of Coffee and Compliance. And thank you again, everybody, for your questions. And obviously a big thank you to Rob for joining us as well. Just to give you a recap on what we've discussed then. So Rob has given us some really great insight from a PFC point of view into EUDR requirements and also that chain of custody certification. And of course, the benefit of working with technology partners such as Timber ID. And then Swapan has touched on how traceability tools improve the process through the use of electronic delivery notes and a decentralized system. And then obviously Rob and Swapan have just given some great advice there about what to do if you've not started yet. So join us next Thursday again at 9:30 and we'll be answering your questions. As Swapan mentioned at the beginning of this session, next Thursday is a big milestone in the EUDR process with regard to the call for the 1-year delay and simplification. So we'll be looking at what implications that has for the supply chain, especially for those who are yet to start the business. So see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.